please can you introduce yourself and what you do?
Yes, I'm Jennifer. I'm a forensic psychologist and a social worker, and I work with children, young people and adults who have been in trouble in some way. So different various behaviours, but a lot of the people I work with have displayed harmful sexual behaviour or done a sexual offence. I'm also an assistant professor in forensic psychology as well.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. And it's so difficult for us to think about children and young people, children and teenagers displaying harmful sexual behaviour. And that is what we spoke about when we first recorded this, and my computer malfunctioned and we lost the recording, which was so sad. But we're going to go through the information again because we're re-recording now. So please can you start by explaining what is harmful sexual behaviour and how are we supposed to be introduced to this topic if it's something we've never really thought about before?
Yes, I think it's probably worth sort of thinking, we think about sexual behaviour generally in children and adolescents, teenagers, as being on a sort of spectrum or a continuum. So harmful sexual behaviour essentially is when something has happened, when a child has displayed a behaviour that's harmed someone else. It could have harmed themselves as well, but either somebody's been harmed or is at risk of being harmed. But that is on this continuum that begins really where it's important to think about sexual behaviour in children and teenagers can be normative. So it depends on the behaviour and the context. So even very young children will explore bodies, will notice their body parts, other people's body parts, may even touch or other children's body parts. And in some contexts that could be very, very normative, and could be very responsive then to a safe adult explaining, intervening, educating the child. And similarly with teenagers will engage in sexual behaviours with each other. So we know the law in this country is 16, but we also know that children are doing sexual things below that. And again, in some contexts, that could be considered normative and okay. So that might be where both young people consent, where at their older age of adolescence, so we are talking then, 15, 16 sort of ages, maybe even 14, but that nobody's got power over the other. They are both able to consent, and that might be considered okay behaviour that doesn't require, certainly doesn't require people like me to get involved. It still might require adults to educate and help them make sure everything's safe and okay. But what we've then got is a continuum that's used quite a lot is by a researcher called Simon Hackett. So he talks about within each age group, you sort of think about what would be normal and typical at that age, what would be healthy sort of sexual curiosity or exploration. And then next there's a category that he labels inappropriate. So that might be a sort of single instance of a behaviour that's not quite, it's a little bit out of the sort of healthy bracket, but perhaps it only happens once. And again, inappropriate should be responsive to some kind of adult intervention. Some adult should, if an adult supports that child to stop, that behaviour should then stop. If then we have got children that either carry on after that sort of effort to educate them, or a behaviour could be problematic straight away. So that's something that is slightly more outside of that norm. So it's problematic behaviours would be behaviours that would cause a concern at some level. So again, that might be the context. For example, a teenager engaging in masturbation, but doing that in an open forum, say they live in a care home and they do it in the shared living room or they do it at school. So that might be problematic, but it might not quite have met the threshold for harmful, because harmful is where either that problematic behaviour keeps going and then, for example, people are witnessing what this child's doing and that can become psychologically harmful for them, or a harmful behaviour could be that somebody is immediately harmed. So there is a victim, there is a direct sexual offence, and somebody somebody is harmed by that. So that would be sort of that continuum. On the Hackett Continuum, actually, there is a fifth category that he labels violent, and that's where it sort of very clearly would meet an offence threshold, where either direct violence is used or higher levels of force and coercion are used. And it might be, again, the context, so that might be something against a stranger, so there's absolutely no reason that there was any contact between these people. So that sort of continuum hopefully helps to kind of explain that we don't jump always straight in at harmful. It might be that there's something going on, there's some kind of sexual behaviour has happened with a little child or with a teenager, and it may well be that it's obviously harmful and it's something that needs a police response, needs a social care response, but we really encourage that there's some thinking about before it's labelled that, because other behaviours we might actually think, actually, is this just an inappropriate behaviour that we still need to do perhaps something about, but maybe doesn't need that level of response and that label. And as you can probably tell by me talking, it definitely isn't a science. And people could have a different view, or you could even change your view over time and think, actually, thinking about it now that I've met this child a few more times, I think differently.
Okay, so it's all about not, well, I suppose that the advice, I've been into primary schools before where they've had problems with students showing a behavior that is concerning them. And so I'm feeling like this continuum is helping schools, primary schools and secondary schools, not press the panic button at every situation.
Absolutely. And there's another one, a similar version of it. I think I mentioned last time, that's called the Brook traffic light tool. And that's three categories. So traffic light, it's got sort of, green behaviours, and it breaks it down into ages. So it'll say green behaviours of children between 5 and 7, or whatever the age groups are, would look like this. Amber behaviours are do something, but as you say, don't necessarily go straight into panic mode. Does it need, social care and police involvement, or does it need a different response with perhaps school, parents, carers? And then you've got red behaviours where it is saying kind of not literally panic button, but do something, like something is really not right here. So those kind of continuums can help, whether it's schools, social workers, exactly as you said, to either not minimise the behaviour, because it might be that when you look at it, actually it's red, it's in that abusive end of Hackett's continuum, or it might be, as you say, reduce the anxiety of actually children can be sexual,
Right.
in different ways and different contexts, and it doesn't always require necessarily that kind of panic and anxiety.
Okay, so when we say children can be sexual, that is a jarring statement for lots of people to hear. And actually, the response that a lot of people will have to that is that's impossible because they're children, especially when we're talking about prepubescent ages. How can they be sexual in any way? There's not a sexual bone in their body. Can we dive into that a little bit, please?
Yeah, sure. And I think that would then be about what we mean by sexual. So prepubescent children shouldn't be seen as sexually motivated. But what we mean by that is it might be that, say, if a primary school did say this child and a child went under the table and looked up another child's skirt, if we then are saying, okay, we're worried that this child has got harmful sexual behaviour, then we're labelling that as sexual because we're worried that that child has looked at that other child's sort of sexual body parts. But what we would say about that is, yes, there's something needs to be done about that. And is it simply that that child needs to be told by the teacher, and, parents need to be spoken to, and it's explained about privacy and bodies and all that kind of stuff that children should be getting taught, in my opinion, anyway. And in that sense, we wouldn't want to label that a harmful sexual behaviour, but we would want to accept, why are we concerned? Well, we're concerned because it's sexual. So if that child looked, or, it feels like it's sexual, sorry, but that child is not motivated by sex because they are so young. However, what you will see in little children, and this can feel jarring, is what are effectively adult sexual behaviours or adult sexual language. And what that would immediately raise concern about is, what has that child seen? And that's
Right.
the thing, I think, that fits with what you're saying. Children cannot be inherently sexual, little
Mm,
children.
mm.
If a small child, prepubescent child, is behaving in a way that they are reenacting what would be an adult sex act, or they are, certainly if they are sort of mimicking with toys or with other children what we would consider sexual behaviours, and they're using sexual language around that as well, and they're saying that what they are doing is something sexual, then immediately we are thinking, has that child witnessed that, experienced that, or seen pornography? Or it might be as simple as heard an older brother or sister or seen something on TV. So again, it's about understanding the context.
Right.
Is there something that can help us understand why this child has said that word or done that action? But certainly we should have some response if we've got little children behaving in ways that would appear sexual. So I think when I say children can be sexual, what I mean is they're going through sexual development, and during our early years sexual development just looks very different. It's not about sex, it's not about sexual arousal, it's not about having sexual thoughts, but it is about being aware of bodies. It is about knowing that certain parts of our bodies are private. That is all sexual development. Why is that part of your body different than your arm or your hand? So we start to sort of socialize our children, hopefully in a healthy way, and that is sexual development. So also teaching things around consent right from a young age, not about sexual consent, but about your right to say no, your right to have privacy, your right for, and again, we would focus on lots of areas with that. You've got a right to say no to anything, to being hugged or kissed, which might not even be sexual, but might be, I am an advocate for allowing children to have the freedom to say, I don't like that or I don't want that. But then we are also doing that with in mind that there are certain parts of the body that definitely would not be touched or looked at outside of certain contexts. So I think that's what I mean by sort of children can be sexual. We need to allow that sexual development to happen, curiosity, although it's not sexual in the way that we mean as adults, if I'm explaining that well enough. And then we've got teenagers who can be overtly sexual, and it is then about distinguishing between once they are in puberty, of course, then hormonal changes, body changes, teenagers will think about sex or fancying somebody or wanting to be liked and wondering about their sexuality and etc. And again, we need to allow that without jumping straight to sort of seeing it as problematic, unless there is a context that makes us worried about it, the frequency of which they're thinking or acting on sexual thoughts, or of course the context. If somebody else is being hurt, is not consenting, then that is not just adolescent development anymore. That is, okay, you've gone outside of what's typical. And that's why the continuums can just help to sort of pitch, okay, am I uncomfortable because it's my child and I don't like to think of them in that way? Or is the school uncomfortable because we can all get anxious about the thought of it? Is the sexual behaviour going to happen, and am I going to be the teacher on duty and I've not done something? So we need to help with sort of, if necessary, calming anxiety, but also sometimes not, to validate and say, yeah, this is outside the norm, and this is then collectively the action that we want to take.
Amazing. So if we have a child, let's say prepubescent child in primary school, and they were to do something that, for example, they were to show another pupil their private area during their PE changing, and maybe they played that was all very innocent, and they were just being experimental or trying to be funny, but it was to do with the private area. So as a society, we say that that's not it's not against the rules, but we don't do that here, right? So the child, if we can establish the child has done that very innocently, then we kind of pull them aside, give them the correct education, let them know that that's not what we do, and then that could be labelled as normal behaviour. But would they need to then be flagged and monitored? Because if it happens again and again and again, then that can move up the continuum. Is that how it works?
It might, even depending what they did, it might even have gone into inappropriate. So depending, but certainly it'd be down at that end of the sort of continuum. So yeah, exactly as you've said, it would be about speaking to that child, perhaps even speaking to the whole class, because it might not be just him or her that's doing it, and that might be just a really good opportunity to speak to all the children in the class and either remind them if it's stuff that you've already discussed, or this is a great opportunity now to help all the children, or maybe just this child if there's something specific. I would always advocate for speaking to the parents, not to hype it up, not a sort of a serious incident's happened, you need to come in, but we need to make sure that the same messages are being given at home and at school. So the parents or carers might be just informed in the same way that you would if that child had hit somebody that day, or children will fight over toys, and you wouldn't necessarily have a big song and dance about it, but you might just tell the parents, just to let you know he's been sort of nipping or hitting. And then, yeah, absolutely record it in a way that's, child friendly, not labeling, not stigmatizing, but yeah, because you are looking for, is there a pattern? So if a week later it's a different teacher or a substitute teacher, so all schools will have a recording system. And if that never happened again, that really shouldn't then feature. It shouldn't be carrying on to different schools all the rest of that child's life. So it is about recording it in just a really factual way. What happened, not using, strong language that would sort of exaggerate, but equally not minimizing it. Something happened. This child looked at this other child there or touched them in a certain way. And absolutely then, if that is a repeating pattern, that is when you're moving into problematic. Definitely into inappropriate, potentially into problematic. And little children can have harmful sexual behaviour, and that again can be difficult for people to think about, but they can. So if that child is touching other children and it doesn't respond to that lower level of adult intervention, and they continue to do that, then absolutely we would be looking at it. This is a child as young as they are that's presenting with some harmful sexual behaviours.
Okay. And then, as you mentioned, we need to look at potentially what they've seen, what they've heard, what they've been shown, because you mentioned about the no inherent sexual desire for sexual arousal, sexual motivation.
Yeah, in the way that we use it as an adult, so a little child can't think in a typical way like I want to have sex with that other child. They are too young for that thought. They shouldn't even know that's a thing. They've not had the body and hormone changes that would drive that. And their brain shouldn't yet know about that. So you can like another child, obviously, when you're little, but that wouldn't be sexual. It wouldn't be sexual, would it? And as we know, people can have boyfriends, girlfriends when they're little, that they will use that sort of language because children love to imitate adults. So
Yes.
they will love to say that they are, this is my girlfriend, and even little children talk about, I don't know, getting married, whatever.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
there shouldn't be sexual elements to that. And if there are, then the younger they are, the more confident we can be that they've seen, heard, witnessed, experienced. Because where has it come from? And as I say, it might be that it's easily explained, and that the parent says, "Oh my gosh, there was this thing on TV, I couldn't believe it," and that kind of witnessed it once. Parent responds in a healthy way. That should go away then, shouldn't it? You'd expect that then to be that kind of conversation. This is why we don't do that. This is why you don't use that word. You would expect that child then to that behaviour to not repeat.
Yeah.
If the behaviour repeats and or is immediately very serious, we don't always have to wait for an escalation. Sometimes it's serious enough on day one. It's, this child has done something that is just way beyond their age and stage of development. But other times it might be, okay, what they did in isolation isn't massively concerning. We'll have a chat to them. But then a week and a month later, it's happening again. Other children are coming and telling the teacher, etc. And that's when you would think, okay, this can't be just about seeing it once and, why is this child not responding to what we're doing? The other thing to always think about is things like neurodivergence in children. If we have told them a different way, have they understood it? Have we told them in a way that's that they can understand it at their age, or at their if they've got any kind of additional needs? Because what can sometimes happen is children are just told we don't do that, but we're not clear. They're not clear. What don't we do? They might have done several things that day, or so it's been really clear with children what we mean. What do we not do? And if we can, why not? And that might be using words like private or personal, or so it's just explaining that this is exactly what this behaviour is what we don't do. We don't want you to do. This is why. And hopefully then, if it is a sort of normative stroke inappropriate, that should be enough. And there'll be lots of children that are doing that are looking under the table or going in the toilet with it, that kind of law. That's exploratory. Playing doctors and nurses, and or whatever game it might be that it might involve, let's all take our clothes off. What we don't want then is immediately jump into that child was doing a sex offence. However, if there's a particular child where games always involve taking clothes off, that's the kind of time that you'd be more worried. Why does every game result in clothes off or touching? Then you would think, okay, this is more. Or as I've said already, if they're using sort of very adult language or reenacting, displaying sort of what are clearly sexual behaviours with sexual movements or noises, that would immediately be at the red end of the
Yeah.
continuum.
Okay, thank you so much. So interesting. So can we now start to move on to teenagers? Because we've talked about the primary school ages where we don't expect them to have any sexual drive. So if we do see something, we're looking at where that's come from, etc., etc. You explained it brilliantly. So now, when you get into the teenage ages, secondary school ages in particular, where lots of these young people have been through puberty, they will now have a sexual drive. I remember I was a very early developer. Maybe my voice dropped when I was in year seven, so I was 12 then. So that was pretty early, I believe, for boys. And so I would have started having a sexual drive, fancying the girls, etc., thinking about my first kiss and wanting to get that. So now that whole environment has changed. So now, where does the continuum sit when it comes to teenagers? Then what's normal and what's problematic, etc.?
So again, with everything, it's always about the context. So of course, about the age as well. So we talk about adolescence or teenage years. Where do they begin? Well, puberty is getting younger on average. So as you've said, it can be about when does it physically begin, but also when does it sort of socially begin. So sometimes we think of socially begins at sort of high school. So even though you're only 11, you're at secondary school, that kind of step up to, and people will start using words like young man, young
Yeah,
woman, and all of a sudden we start to almost sort of this big jump from you were a child and then you get up on the in September in year seven and suddenly you started to you treated very differently. So yeah, so there's that whole thing of what age are we talking about, where are they at physiologically, but then it's massively about the social context, isn't it, with adolescence. So what we're thinking about there is things like the context. So how the younger end of adolescence was, you're still on the border of that primary school age. So even if somebody does start secondary school at 11, we wouldn't accept that sexual behaviour at 11 is okay. It's so below the age of consent, but also not just about what the law says. That's about that child is not developed enough to give informed consent. They are not their brain development is not enough that they can start to engage in decisions about sexual behaviours, and nor at that age should they be sort of aware of a range of adult sexual behaviours. However, I'm sure we'll get to this in time, but pornography is one issue that is also impacting on the sexual development of children. Children are routinely, by the age of 11 at secondary school, they have a mobile phone. Lots of children now get them in primary school age. So once children have got access to technology, they have potentially got access to sexual material, and that is just as simple as that. So what do we think of in terms of the continuum for adolescents? Well, it's thinking about, so partly about their age. So if we're talking, we do lump them all together with terms like teenagers, adolescents, but a 12-year-old is very different than a 17-year-old. So there's that to think about. Where are they in adolescence? Then you've got the sort of context of it. Is this, so let's say they are at the older end of adolescence, sort of 14, 15, that age, and sexual behaviours do take place or may take place, then it's about things like consent. What's the age, stage of development, social status of the other child? Are they don't, are they in some kind of relationship? Do they know each other? Are they children that the parents or school would expect to be in the same social group? So that's about more than just age. It's about status. It's about sort of things like, has one child got power over the other?
right.
Of course, things like relationships as well. Sibling sexual abuse can occur. So it's not just thinking, are they old enough? Because if they're 14 and 15, but they are related, that again would be into the harmful sexual behaviour, or, certainly into problematic if there's any evidence of anything where related family members are involved. So yes, I think it's thinking about the context. Is it happening in a place that's safe and healthy? And by that we mean that they're not engaging in sexual behaviours in school or in a public place. That so it can be about the literal context, like the environment that it's taking place in. Has anybody got concerns that one person has got power over the other? Substance use in adolescence can happen. And again, this isn't saying that every child that has any kind of sexual contact when they've had a drink, immediately we're talking that it's a harmful behaviour. You'd need to understand the context of that. Can the people that were involved consent? Were they so under the influence of substances that they can't consent? And where you'd be looking at, harmful sexual behaviours if one person is and one isn't, or if there's any indication that one has intoxicated the other for that purpose. So there's so many different contextual factors. What is it that they're doing? Where are they doing it? Who with? So what would be sort of normal there would be two consenting older age teenagers that have got some kind of relationship with each other, i.e. they knew each other, they're not complete strangers, they might be boyfriend, girlfriend, boyfriend, boyfriend, or anything like that. Or they might be peers, but they've chosen to engage
Yeah.
in some kind of sexual activity with each other with consent, and that what's happening would be typical as well. So the behaviour is typical. There's nothing sort of abnormal about what's happening, atypical. And this all might sound sort of very messy, and that's because it kind of is. Now, some babies are just very clearly that is not okay. And of course, teenagers, the children that I work with are charged, convicted of sexual offences. Children can commit sexual offences.
Right.
And there are some situations where it's sort of relatively clear cut that one person didn't consent and one did, was involved in harming. Lots of times it's much less clear than that, which is a problem across the board with sexual offending in terms of, I mean, evidence for police and proving things, because as we know, harmful sexual behaviour, sexual offending often take place in secret without people knowing, and can be very difficult to prove. So yes, that's the sort of legal end of it. But in terms of thinking about what are we looking for, well, we're looking for somebody not being happy about what took place.
That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
I didn't want that to happen to me, or I didn't want it to happen then or in that way, or it's happened before but I didn't want it again. So anything like that, and we're immediately concerned. And then you'd want to know more about, is it problematic? How what is it that somebody's saying happened? What do we know about the child that allegedly did this harm? And yeah, so I think that it is complex, because what we don't do with teenagers is immediately think, well, how do they even know about sex? So that's the difference between them and the little ones, is we're not able to say he or she must have been sexually harmed themselves, because of course teenagers will know about sex, they will be talking about it, looking for it, thinking about it. So that wouldn't worry us in the same way it would the little ones, but it's how they go about it. And what we've got to sort of balance up the whole time is teenagers are navigating relationships, getting it wrong, making mistakes. And what we don't want to do is lump all that into harmful sexual behaviour. So this isn't about, we definitely don't want to minimise and write it off as a harm, oh, he's only a boy, he's or she's only 15. We have to accept that 14, 15-year-old little children, as I've said, can display harmful sexual behaviours, and they can display serious harmful sexual behaviours that cause significant harm. But equally, teenagers are going around working their way through relationships, social context. So it's really about, I think using things like these continuums, where there is a concern, we always recommend, where possible, a multidisciplinary discussion. In other words, that there's more than one person, because I wouldn't want to say, I work in this field, I wouldn't say, tell me the details, Jeremy, and I'll tell you if it's harmful or not, because we need, it's such a big thing that you're doing. If we are saying, right, this child has displayed a harmful sexual behaviour, there will be serious repercussions for that child. And so if that's what's needed. So it's where there are things that are not clear cut, where you can't sort of very clearly say, okay, that's just sort of normative teenagers, we need to maybe not do nothing, maybe educate them, maybe the parents need a word. So it might be that level, versus this is very clearly a sexual offence, the police need to be called, social care needs to be involved. Some behaviours you'll sort of be able to make that call, but lots will be in that middle bit where it's the discussion needs to happen. Does it need a response from people like me, services that I work in, where that child then needs a specialist assessment, they need perhaps an intervention, they might need restrictions on their movements, their liberty, all of those kind of decisions should never be made by one single professional, nor should writing it off as normative if we are not sure, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes sense. And as you mentioned, it's not a clear-cut science. It's not like maths, 1+1 is always 2. It's like there's so many variables to consider that I completely understand. It's like a round table discussion. So we've talked about primary school ages in general, and then secondary school ages. And all I can think about when we're talking about that is education, education, education.
Sure. I think I speak for so many people that work in my field when, would I use the word horrified? I don't think that's too strong a word, to hear that sex and relationships education was being changed in our country so that children get it later. And I think this comes from this sort of, my understanding of it is there's a bit of a public concern or outcry that little children are being taught about sex, and that's just never been the case. We use that sort of term, sex and relationships education. I was speaking about this in a training course I was doing the other day when someone said, what age would you suggest we first start talking to children about sex? And I was saying, remove the word sex. What the first age that we should start speaking to children about bodies and privacy
Right.
is early, right from the very, very, very beginning. Now, that isn't technically sex education because we're not talking about sex, but that is prevention of child sexual abuse. I think that is helping to children to sort of said a bit of this already, but to know what is
Yeah.
okay and not okay, and to know that they can have a voice, and talking to children about secrets and what secret, that kind of thing would, for me, come under that umbrella of sex and relationships education, helping children to understand personal space and all of that. So I think that it has to, I can't remember what the question you asked me now, but I think we need to education. Yes, I completely agree. And then the average age of onset for harmful sexual behaviour, average age is 14. So that obviously can start much younger, as I've said. So we need well before the age of 14 to have educated children. Do you
Yeah.
know what a minefield is it? We use words like consent and think it's really sort of it's this or it's that. It's so nuanced.
Yeah.
It's not this sort of black and white concept. It's not a dichotomy, you consent or you don't. Now, of course, it can be as simple as that. And some of the children I work with that have sexually harmed will talk about things like he or she didn't scream or didn't push me away. Now, we know, from the research, from clinical practice, that people don't always that's not we don't need to get to somebody screaming to say they don't consent.
Yeah.
How do you read body language? How do you, and then talking here about teenagers, but helping children to think about consent, not sexual consent, but from a young age consent. I
Yeah.
get to say no to something. That's consent.
Right. Right. Right.
I get to have a choice. I get to I get to have my voice heard. If somebody says we keep secrets,
Yeah.
this is why we don't.
Yeah.
All of that builds and builds and builds. That by the age of teenage years, that centre of the mid adolescence at sort of 14, 15, 16, that well before that we've thought about relationships and when is it okay to send a nude.
Yeah.
Because if we just say to children, don't send nudes, which is often the message they get, it's like saying don't drink alcohol or don't smoke weed.
Yeah.
There's no evidence that stops children either. So we need much more sort of nuanced discussion about, okay, there might be times when it might be with a partner, a girlfriend or boyfriend, or in your group chat that pictures might get sent round. What do we need to think about that? When would that be okay? Not okay. Not just about what the law says, because again, we often teach children because it is illegal, and children, yeah, they need to know that for sure, because some don't. But again, teenagers don't just act within the law. You shouldn't be drinking under 18, but you do, etc. So it's about, yeah, absolutely, the education bit of it might be about the law, but also about the nuanced things. How do you tell if somebody wants to do something sexual with you beyond them screaming no? So there's some stuff around sort of enthusiastic consent, helping children to see that if somebody's not very clearly saying yes, then assume they're saying no.
Yeah.
It's difficult stuff to navigate. These are teenagers, and lots of teenagers that I work with as well that have displayed harmful sexual behaviours, they have themselves experienced adversity and trauma. So they have experienced unhealthy relationships. It's not always sexual abuse. There is a proportion of children with harmful sexual behaviours that have themselves been sexually harmed in some way, online, offline. But it's not always that. They might have grown up in domestically violent homes where the messages that they're getting may be about gender roles, that men are in control.
Yeah.
So actually, if we don't educate, how are we balancing that out? Now, of course, there's also needed, a response. Sexual abuse prevention should be concerned with just child abuse prevention, because it's not just if you're growing up in a domestically violent home, for example, education alone won't change your attitude, but
Right.
it's having that education available so that our boys and our girls, everybody, all children, have got a chance to think about things. Who is in control in a relationship? Those kind of discussions, and people talk about, I don't even like to mention his name, Andrew Tate or
Yeah.
whoever it is, but we're not, we sort of talk, we want to get him off the agenda, but I think we don't. Let's talk about not him in detail, but let's talk about that then.
Yeah.
What is it to think that, have a view like that? Because actually, if you talk about that with boys and with girls, that's the only way that will work through it and help them to have a different opinion.
And they're so appreciative when you talk to them about it, like especially teenagers, they're so appreciative. And some of the work I've done in primary schools, and this discussion that I'm having with you now is helping me so much because I'm just putting together new sessions for year three upwards. And when I talk about, I mean, I met a friend at the last weekend, and I said to him, he was like, "How's it going? How's work?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm putting some sessions together for year three, year four, year five, year six." And he was like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Oh no." No, no, you're thinking about it completely wrong. You
Yeah.
think I'm going to go and tell them my story and talk about abuse and sexual abuse and what happened and he touched me there. I'm not going to do any of that, right? Like you say, consent isn't always about sex and consent, right? Consent is about body autonomy, right? You have the right to say no to certain things that make you feel uncomfortable. Personal boundaries. What's this bubble? How do we respect personal boundaries? They're all information that year threes, fours, fives, and sixes, they need to understand very well because otherwise they may make, would I be right in saying they may make a mistake and do something that's against those rules if they don't know that they're rules?
Yeah, and if they don't kind of know, and why, I mean, the why isn't about a really detailed, like theoretical why, but just explaining that, to children what the rules are, and to have that dialogue about, and sometimes, because every rule, if we think of any kind of personal space rule, there's caveats to that, isn't there?
Yeah,
So when would it be okay? And
yeah,
it's really complex, isn't it? And because we know, for example, most sexual abuse takes place in the family or someone you know, it's not even as simple as saying only people in your family can, it's really complex stuff. But as you said, it's about having that discussion with children and just giving them space to talk about that, to do it playfully,
yeah,
because and that's the fear, I think, as you've said, your sort of friends, oh gosh, because the worry is when you use words like, if it's talking about sex and relationships education, that we're going to, as you say, sit down and describe graphic sexual
yeah,
acts.
yeah.
Well, absolutely nobody is hopefully doing that in schools,
Yes.
or should be doing that, and I'm sure it would be called out very quickly. But you get this real reaction, and I don't know the exact number of this, but what I can tell you is the number of children I've worked with who were actively withdrawn from sex education. Well, that is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
That and I'm not saying it's just because of that, of course not, that's only why they came on to do something harmful that lands them working with me. But of course, people that may be acting harmfully towards children, it might be in their interest to not, for those children not to be learning other views, or it's children growing up in neglectful, chaotic homes, so they're only missing it by coincidence. It's not always planned. They're missing it because the school attendance is not great. So then we've got children who are, say, for example, accessing pornography at earlier rates, which we know is true of neglect. Children experiencing neglect are at higher risk of early exposure to pornography use, certainly in the research I did. At the same time, those children might not be having any education to buffer what they're looking at. So then, and at the same time, they may be living in homes where they're also witnessing or experiencing unhealthy relationships, even if it's not directly sort of sexual abuse of them. They might be in sexualized environments where sex is talked about, or they're seeing unhealthy gender roles or views of females and males. So all of these things can be factors that can be influential in harmful sexual behaviour. So it's not all about education in school, certainly not, but that's part of the picture.
Yeah.
It's involving parents in things as much as possible, so that parents, I do lots of work with parents around talking to children about sex and pornography, because it's not easy to do, and it's certainly not in sort of British culture,
Yeah.
sure, and in lots of different cultures. And there's some really great sort of resources to help parents with this, and to support parents to just think about how do you have that dialogue, because it's often not happening. So what we've then got is children that have got unhealthy messages coming in through pornography, perhaps unhealthy in their peer groups if they're all talking about things that they've seen online, or whatever it might be, and there's not a whole lot buffer in that. So I think, education is part of it, but it's easy to be critical of the education system. Are teachers getting the right training and support?
Yeah.
Are teachers the right people to deliver it all the time, actually?
Yeah.
There's some research that says that in terms of sexual abuse prevention, primary prevention definitely includes the education element. And there was some research done where children what came through is it is important who delivers it. Now, that's not to say the exact, they didn't name a type of person, but it has to be someone that's themselves comfortable with it,
Yeah.
that's themselves knowledgeable enough, not in terms of facts of knowledge, but, if you've got someone delivering that cannot say the word masturbation or even go there, then how are we going to sit in a room full of teenagers and talk about anything to do with sending nudes, masturbation, or with the little ones? If you are struggling yourself to talk about body parts, the child, as we know, children are absolutely brilliant at working people out, and they will read you and they will know that this person is themselves really embarrassed here, or so there is, and that just came through in the research that it said it matters who delivers it. It shouldn't be just somebody reading off a slide or reading, out of a book or a piece of paper. So it matters, but children want that information. You sort of said that yourself. They want it. They will. Children and adolescents, they are sponges. They are ready to take it in. And would education alone eradicate this? Absolutely not. But it could, for some children, make a difference. It could also help with disclosure for children that are already being harmed. And then, I think there's so much to think about with what else would help. But education is part of the picture.
I agree. So what I talk about a lot in my sessions when I deliver training to teachers is the school has the potential to maximize the chances that a child will either come forward if they're in a situation, or a child wouldn't act out in a situation. The school can educate that child, but it's not the only thing that is going to stop things. But the home is a big part to play too. So the parents in the home, the way the parents are behaving, and the conversations the parents are having with children. So there you have this like two big opportunities. That's mostly the child's environment, isn't it, at school and at home. So then I suppose, where's the other influences coming from? Where's their other education coming from? If it's not coming from schools, it's not coming from parents, well, it's coming from the internet, because they're on their phone all the time.
Sure. And I think, just to say before, because we'll get, the internet's a massive thing, but equally it's for sexual abuse prevention, whether that's HSB, children doing it to each other, or adults to children, every single sort of professional service, as well as families, as you've said, have got a role to play. Health, making sure that health professionals are skilled up, because each little part of that puzzle. So if we're seeing a little child and for whatever reason they've gone to a health appointment, and there's something about their behaviour that appears sexual, we need health professionals as well to be on to what is that flagging for us, or older children that might have been linked in at some level with health or mental health services. So I think there's a real need for education across the board, so that other professionals know when to be concerned and what to do about that, or, as you've said, to note it down, even if it's something that they don't think they can act on right now, but just then, because the picture, the puzzle comes together if there is a story to tell. But as you were saying, the other big key influence now is the internet, and that is getting younger and younger. And we don't just mean porn in terms of sort of going on Pornhub, or even more the illegal material, harmful material. It's in just the media. And that sounds like, sometimes you feel like a bit, because as if everybody's parents have said that what you're listening to is not okay. That's every generation. But it's not about being sort of prudish, is it? It's about, I think the bigger difference is it's coming in at children all the time now. So it's no longer putting on the TV and watching MTV and there's a video that an adult might be like, oh, she's not got enough clothes on, or that kind of sort of, every generation thinks the next generation is becoming more sort of problematic. But it really is now that children are holed away in bedrooms with or sat on the sofa, whatever, with tablets, with MacBooks, laptops, whatever, but then they've got this phone from a younger and younger age, and it's all the time. And I've got one on now, a smartwatch. So whatever's coming in at you, healthy or unhealthy, is there 24/7, and that's the difference, isn't it? And sometimes when you work with resistant parents around pornography, and you might get often the male carer that's like, when I was younger, I watched porn, but it's different now. What you are talking about is the odd pornography magazine going round your friends, something like that. And it's not to say that can't be influential, but now we're talking about, it could be hours and hours and hours a day. And it's the messages, whether it's to do with characters such as Andrew Tate, whether it's things on YouTube, TikTok, children's programs have set, you can watch people will say that the little child likes Peppa Pig. You can get on YouTube and it'll just play Peppa Pig repeatedly. What will pop up part way through is this really sexualized version, or a massacre and Daddy Pig kills all the family. And I hear this time and time again, and it's always quite, in training, it's quite laughable, or it might be Thomas the Tank Engine, but this is what kids are seeing. and either becoming desensitized to it or being being like horrified by it. And one of the psychiatrists that I used to work with, if he listens to this, he'll know it's him. Yeah, he was saying he was unsat with his daughters and obviously thought he were doing all the right stuff. Works in this field, same as me. And then he just heard one of his daughters like, "Daddy, Daddy, what's happening?" And thank God she said it to him, and there it is. That was what I can't remember which cartoon character it was, but a sexual version of it. Now he thought he had all the parental controls, he knows about this stuff, and then we've got so many parents that don't. I've only just today been working with some parents that I do it a lot to really just try and skill them up and say, don't feel like you're stupid. This is most parents don't know, and if any of us, 100% me included, ever think we know what children are up to, we do not.
Nope.
So we can educate ourselves and keep on top of it, and there's various websites, and I'm happy to send them through to you if you've got links that you can forward them on to help parents keep updated, to help them understand parental controls, but also realise that parental controls do not stop everything.
Right.
So it's not just about getting them on, but it is about having them on. There was some research done that something like said 90% of parents know about parental controls, but only 70% use them. So then you've got 30% of children in that particular study, absolutely unregulated internet use.
And the algorithm is doing what it wants to do. It's popping up the next video, it's picking this, it's picking that, and it's all for attention and to keep you captivated. And I am sure that if something popped up on a child's tablet or phone, luckily the person who you were talking to, that young girl, she said something about it. But I'm pretty sure lots of children would see it, be curious, be scared or afraid, quickly scroll past it, but now it's in their brain and they're not going to say anything to their parent because they don't want their tablet taken away.
Exactly that. And that's nearly always the response. So again, in the work with parents, we talk about that is the response needs to not feel punitive. If they're the same response, if a child is even worse into it and they're being groomed or exploited online, the immediate response is to take all their stuff off them. I get that that's from a safeguarding perspective, but that's viewed as a punishment. That's internalized as self-blame, and it's very similar, and it's well intended by professionals and parents, but that's the same as if a child discloses direct contact sexual abuse, in some way saying to them, why did you go around to that person's house? It's that similar message, because the child then thinks, if I hadn't have gone on that site, or if I hadn't, why were you going on your phone at midnight? As soon as you say that is like, yeah, actually this is my fault.
Right.
Midnight. So it's about helping parents and professionals to think, what is we want to prevent it happening in the first place, but if it does, what is the response? Now, it might be that for that period of time we need to take that phone, or we want to take that phone or the tablet or whatever, but it's explaining to the child, we're doing this to make sure that you're safe, and the first thing we want to do is get you back on safely.
Right.
With it not being punitive, like, right, we're having that. So I think the response to technology-based harm can be really, really, and not meaningfully, but it can end up being quite self-blaming in a way that it's not that it doesn't exist in other forms of sexual abuse, because it definitely does, but you'd hope that most people would be quite horrified if we overtly sort of, or said those kind of messages, well, if it were that bad, why did you keep going? We would know now, and should know now, as certainly as professionals working in child protection areas, that should never be said, and that we understand not all, but lots of things around the dynamics of sexual abuse that never should put the blame on the child. We need the same with online stuff.
Yeah.
Even if it does seem like, but why did you not just block them? That's said all the time. That's the same, isn't it? It's basically the same as, why did you not stop going? Or why did you let them in then? Why did you not tell somebody? As soon as we say those things, it can start to bring, increase the shame, internalised sense of blame. So, it might seem like, oh, why did you not just block them? But actually, that questioning in an inquisitive way can be helpful. To understand that, because what is the dynamic that someone's got such control over you? But what we know, of course, is that here now in the cold light of day, you can think about why that is, because children are children. Children can be ruined. People can be very clever in how they do it. They might not block or stop because of fear or because of flattery, or I thought he or she they loved me, or whatever it might be, or I was scared what would happen. I was scared that I'd get in trouble. And this is what the research tells us. That's what children feel. So if we then immediately say, well, why did you not block them? Or why did you not go on that site, etc., that just feeds into that child's view that actually I'm to blame here. think the response to after it has happened, exploitation and abuse online can be very different, and there can be an assumption that it's not as harmful, and the research just does not support that.
Okay.
What I would sort of say is it's not a competition for which is worse. It's all bad. Children being harmed online does not seem to have a lower impact. It doesn't. It doesn't have to be physical contact. And there was that really the guy in Northern Ireland that you might have seen that was convicted
Yep.
last year, and he never met that girl.
Yeah.
He never met that girl, and obviously the end of that story is so tragic and ended with that girl taking her own life. That man never met her, so
Yeah.
that's just a prime
Yeah.
example of how you do not have to have physical contact for abuse to be harmful.
Yeah.
And obviously he is an extreme case, and there were many, many, many children that he harmed. But that's the other thing about the online world. For children doing it or children being on the receiving end, you can do it from the comfort of your own home. You can do it so easily. And then to get it back to children doing this, because children do harm online as well, it's so difficult for children to navigate the online world. We've said it is for the sort of face-to-face world. The online world can be so complex because
Oh,
you can't. It's empathy can be difficult for teenagers. It's not fully developed until adulthood, actually. And for different teenagers, it might be difficult for different reasons. Neurodivergence themselves not having had, helpful responses. So then to have to navigate things like empathy online, where you're not even in the room with somebody, perhaps you can't even see them. It might be typing. So the ability then to think how what you've said might land can be really complex.
yeah.
Sometimes malice isn't intended. Now, sometimes it is, and I work with children that harm online where the function is to be harmful. I'm getting back at someone, I'm punishing someone, I want to extort images out of this person. But sometimes it's thought of as humorous or funny, or just sort of thought of neutral, like, well, I were only asking, and if she didn't want to send them, she didn't have to, and that kind of. But can you see that this message might have been received as quite threatening? Or if you say something like, if you loved me, you'd send them. Now, that can be just a teenager really wanting these nudes and sort of, using what we would label emotional blackmail, but that might be not through malice. It might be through, well, I just really fancy you and I want to see these images. So again, back to that education, helping children to think about what is okay and not okay. How do you navigate respect and empathy if you're not in the room with someone? It can be really complex.
Okay, so that moves us nicely as we move into the last 10 minutes of this. For all the parents that are watching this and have got to this moment and they're like, oh my goodness, this is a minefield. I've got my child in the room upstairs. What can I do starting from today?
So I think so. There are various resources online that can help, as much as the online world can cause the problem. There are things that you can do around parental controls, and this is from a young age. So even before it's the teenager upstairs, there are ways to limit your child. You can put timers on so that from the beginning they're not just given just unlimited exposure. It's harder to get it off them if they're used to that.
Right.
It's harder to take a tablet off that a child's used to having for all day. So you can start right from the beginning. You can start right from the minute that a child gets any access to any device, and that might not even be their own. Parents will generally often give children their phone, and that's not a criticism. I'm a parent, and everybody needs a bit of peace and quiet.
Yeah.
And something that will keep your children quiet is just go on my phone or go on my iPad
Yeah.
or whatever. So it's about then having those conversations right from the beginning of, if somebody talks to you that's not whoever they live with, mummy or daddy or grandma or, foster carers, whoever it is, sort of naming to little children who say, because you can't say things like safe adults, or if somebody you don't know, we need to be clear. From a young age, you name those people. It's me or him or you, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. So help the children know. And then as they get older, of course, you're moving them towards more autonomy. And so at different stages, it would be responded to differently. But it's making sure that from a young age, children know that parents have got a say over what they do,
Right.
because you have a say over where they physically go from a young age. And what we should be doing is getting children ready for adolescence and adulthood slowly. And you start to let them play in the garden, but you've got the gate shut or whatever.
Right.
And that's the same. So you have high levels of restriction when they're little, because you've got a right to have that, and actually a need. And you've got a right to check the child's phone when they're young, and not just a right, we should be doing that. And that shouldn't be seen as invasive, in the same way that you will, as for your little children, you will go in their bedroom, you will, you will kiss them. It's not invasive. It's invasive if you're doing that at 17.
Yeah.
So So it's moving through. So it's making communication the norm. Talking. What have you been doing online? Not only talking when they've done it wrong. Right, you're not going on that anymore. If
Right.
all the experience is, so it's trying to just communicate. Tell me about that game, because what you'll often get is that divide as well. Like, I don't know anything about the online. I don't understand these games. And if children feel that there's that massive divide, then they won't want to speak to parents about the online world. So I would just talk about normalising conversation. Who are you chatting to? What are you doing? Educating where needed. So we've got these whatever the parental locks, whatever you refer to them as, but people, this is so that people can't talk to you that you don't know, and if they do, you come and tell me. And if they've got that message from young, of course when they get older, children start to be more secretive, and adolescents of course start to have their own, they don't want to talk to mum and dad or foster carers or whoever about all their friends, but it should be felt as normal as it can be. And then when you get the little bits of adolescent secrecy, it shouldn't just be complete shutdown. And then for your teenagers, it is about thinking again about communication, about there not being that divide of I don't even know what they're doing on the phone. You should. You
Yeah.
should. Parents need to sort of look, there are things, and I'm happy to send you the resources and you can share them in whatever way that's helpful. But educating parents on VPNs, on the dark web, on encrypted messaging sites. And this does feel overwhelming. And as I talk, people might be zoning out at this point and thinking this is too much. But it exists, and children are using anonymity software. And I think the recent stuff with porn has probably made it more likely.
Yeah.
So while there's some benefits, and I get that we needed to have some regulation over pornography, but now that you've got to prove you're 18, one of the ways to get around that is to get a VPN on your phone, which
Interesting.
then tells the porn company, the porn site, that you're in a different country.
Yeah.
So teenagers are using them, but parents often don't even know that that's a thing. So
Yeah.
that's what I mean by sort of educating parents to a degree. I don't know what teenagers are getting up to, and I'm not a teenager, but there are resources out there to help skill you up so that you at least know what is available, how the sites work, what the social media sites do, so that then you can either have the conversations with your child, educate them, help them to use it safely from a young age. And then of course by the time they're sort of 16, 17, if everything's going well, then a parent shouldn't be shouldn't be looking in that child's phone. Obviously for some parents that I work with, there are continued restrictions and monitoring because that child's been getting into trouble. So I think, yeah, not only reacting to technology with a punitive response of removing it, but trying to sort of, yeah, help children between school, between parents. There are online resources for children as well. You might have heard, I don't know if you've seen the Shaw resource from Lucy
Yeah.
Gray Foundation. Yeah, so it's really encouraging children to use that, as children will have questions, and if they put them straight into a search engine, they could get anything back.
Yeah.
So growing up, sexual curiosity, it might be about your sexuality, it might be about something you've done, or is this okay? I've heard this word, what does that mean? Because now you would go straight to a search engine, as you and I would for anything you don't know.
Yeah.
Go to ChatGPT or you go to one of the search engines. So what we don't want is the only thing they're getting back being unregulated.
Yeah.
Because if you start to put sexual things, even remotely sexual, even into the open web, you will get sexual stuff back.
Yeah.
And children are reporting, within research, it's telling us that most children are reporting that they first see porn accidentally.
Yeah.
So they might be just putting a word in or
Yeah.
just putting something in, they see porn, and then that's it, they're
Yeah.
exposed to it.
So I feel like the basics, the base level is good communication. Just good communication from the start. And if you're watching or listening to this and you're like, I just haven't been doing that, make a start. Make a
Sure.
start by just saying, asking a few questions, being inquisitive, being real, explaining that you made mistakes when you were young too, and you just want to be there to support, help if there's anything going wrong.
Yeah, and acknowledge to children that this might feel a bit cringe or this might feel a bit embarrassing. This is hard for me to have this conversation because it's not easy for a parent, and I would never want to say that. Like, just sit your child down tonight and talk about porn. Like, that is, if that's not how your family is, and you're not open about things like that, that can be the furthest from what you would want to do. But for parents that I work with where their child has done something harmful online, those parents are distraught at the fact they had no
Yeah,
idea, and they will
yeah,
say, I no idea. Yeah, and then it's also educating and skilling up professionals. This is about the online world and direct sort of contact harmful sexual behaviour. It's helping people to see this, the early warning signs, not just when something happens. And sometimes there aren't any, and there is nothing more with hindsight that could have been done. But sometimes there is evidence, and it might be just little things piling up. Start, you know, if a child is say with the online stuff, if they get in trouble at school because whatever, something to do with sending nudes or sending messages, it's making sure that there is a response. It just won't, it might not go away on its own. And sometimes when I get the work with the child where something has happened and probably the police are involved by now, looking backwards, often, not always, but often it's like, that was an opportunity to
Right.
intervene. And I know hindsight is a wonderful thing, but it is supporting, like I say, whether it's schools, health professionals, social care professionals, because parents sometimes as well will say to me, I knew he had an issue with porn, but where do you go with that?
Huh.
What, well, who do you go to? What do you do if you think your child's watching too much porn? Is it a doctor? Do you go to a doctor? Do you go to whatever? You know.
Wow.
So what I think it's helping all professionals to see this. Prevention is everybody's business.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we need to make it sort of. We don't want certain professions to think that's not my thing.
Yeah.
Then we need to sort of really not normalize is the wrong word, but normalize talking about it,
Yeah.
normalize it being an issue. It's an issue for so many
Yeah.
children.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, amazing. Jennifer, thank you so much. Please send me through all the resources because I'm going to put them in the show notes. So anybody that's engaging with this, that's interested in doing further reading, you can go into the show notes of this podcast and that's all going to be there. I would love one day in the future, this is my aim with all of this, is to be able to one day rent a studio, bring someone in like yourself and have a face-to-face discussion, but over a long period of time, because all of the research and the studies that you've mentioned along the way in this conversation, I would love to be diving into those as well to find out what they were about, how were they conducted, what were the results, what can we learn from them. So that's really the goal in the future. And I know you mentioned Lucy Faithful Foundation. I've known them since I've been doing this work. They support me as well, and I'd like to bring in yourself and some people from that organisation to talk about Sure and how we're helping young people and how we're changing the conversation. So this was really interesting for me, Jennifer. I want to say thank you to you. Is there any websites or anything off the top of your head that you would like to direct people to? I'm not talking about the resources, but do you have a website if people want to look more into your
I
work?
think
Or
now mine is literally being built. So I do a lot of consultation training in this, as well as the sort of direct work with children and families. So I don't, but you've got my email address,
yes,
Jeff, which I'm happy for you to share.
okay,
Want to make contact. I also do some work for the AIM project, which is a service that also works in this area. I'll send you their resource. So their website, sorry, as one of the resources. They've got the continuums that I talked about. They've got one for children with intellectual difficulties. There's a one for the little ones and one for the teenagers, and they're free to use. So they're
brilliant.
free to access professionals, parents, just to help. And yeah, it's a huge area, as I hope I've sort of, harmful sexual behaviour, the online stuff. There's so much to say. I can
Yeah,
talk all day, as you can
yeah.
probably tell, but people don't want to listen all day. So I will happily sort of send you the stuff, follow it up with me if needed.
Fantastic. And I'll put the email in the description because there may be a lot, some people who are watching this thinking, oh, I'd like to know what your training's about and potentially be to bring you in. So, Jennifer, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Um,
Thank you.